In this story, I'm going to tell you how I took back everything a coworker stole from me with a flash drive, a switch certificate, and one slide that played at the exact wrong second. But here's the thing, I didn't set out to humiliate him. I set out to be seen. What followed was public, messy, and surprising. It got me my career back, cost me friendships, and taught me the difference between revenge and repair. Stay with me and I'll show you the plan, the moment the room went silent, and the choice I made afterward. My name is Evelyn Hart. I am 34 and I live in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, in an apartment whose windows look out over a harbor that keeps its secrets even on clear days. I work nights at a small shipping office near the waterfront where the fluorescent lights hum like complaint, and the coffee machine is a relic that refuses to die. I'm the kind of person who notices details people walk past. The way a signature slants when someone is tired, the tiny thumbprint smudge on the paper that marks a last-minute edit, the smell of someone else's cologne lingering on a jacket hung too close. I have a quiet stubbornness that keeps me steady when life tries to tilt me off balance, the sort of stubbornness that comes from growing up in a household where we fixed things ourselves. We didn't call someone to repair a faucet, we learned to shut the water off and take the pipe apart. My father taught me to solder, my mother taught me to keep a ledger. I can change a light fixture, patch a leaky sink, and keep my temper from erupting in front of children or clients, because I learned early that losing control rarely gets you what you need. Lately, my life felt like a series of polite no's. Small denials accumulated into a kind of erosion. I had been passed over for a promotion I should have had, the boss telling me I was too set in my ways, when what I knew was the job. A coworker named Carter began to take credit for reports I wrote late at night, smiling like he was doing me a favor while quietly cutting my hours. He had the easy charm of someone who'd been taught to glide through rooms and leave skid marks of influence. He whispered to our manager that I was difficult, that I complained too much, that I was too emotional. The office is full of small violences like that, a withheld compliment, a name left off a memo, and for months I tried to let them slide. The straw that broke me was petty, almost silly. My name was left off a client thank you note and Carter signed my initials anyway. I tried to shrug it off and keep my head down to let the work speak, but the erasure spread. One Friday, a friend told me Carter had been telling people I was the one who leaked a mistake to a client earlier in the month, a mistake I had found and fixed in the dark hours before anyone else noticed. I sat in my car under the gas station lights and felt something in my chest go quiet and hard, like a bell struck and shorn of its clang. I decided then I would not be shoved aside. I wanted my work to matter, and I wanted Carter to know what it felt like to be flattened by his own games. I did not want theater, I wanted consequence. He would not be allowed to walk through the office smelling like someone else's victory while I was left with the stale air of unpaid overtime. I began to make a plan in the slow, methodical way I'd learned from fixing things: diagnose, gather parts, test, then act. I mapped emails, memorized times, and rehearsed the moments I might need to speak. Still, I had no map for how ugly it might get once I started. I let that worry sit in the back of my head like a warning bell because I was tired of being polite to people who made my life smaller. At night, when the office emptied and the city lights pooled in the harbor, I practiced saying my name aloud until it felt like armor. Evelyn Hart. I repeated the facts to myself until they sounded boring and therefore undeniable. I wanted fairness, not spectacle, but I also wanted the world to see the difference between being overlooked and being stolen from. That quiet decision shifted something in me. It unlatched a door I had kept closed for years. I was not a vindictive person by nature, but I had had enough of being reduced to margins. If I had to make a scene to reclaim what was mine, I would do it with the same careful hands I used to fix a broken hinge. I started with small counters. I documented everything. I printed emails, saved timestamps, and recorded the late-night edits on a flash drive, each file given a careful name and a date so there would be no mistaking when the work was done. I rewound my memory and wrote down conversations I had thought were forgotten. The offhand comments in the break room, the way Carter would phrase a client update as if he had invented the strategy. I changed my voice messages so my outgoing greeting was professional and crisp, and made sure my signature block included the projects I led, small official proofs that my name belonged on the work. I began leaving my desk 10 minutes later, and I took my lunch in the stairwell to avoid Carter's easy smile and the way he would hover near the copier like a shark. I practiced my calm face in the elevator mirror until it looked natural instead of forced. At first, my efforts felt like tending a bruise, rubbing a sore place until it stopped throbbing. I asked our manager for a sit-down and calmly laid out the missing credits and the timeline for the project Carter claimed, sliding the printed emails across his desk like evidence. He nodded and said he would look into it and then did nothing. When I suggested that the team use a shared document to track edits, Carter laughed in the meeting and said, "We do not need that, Evelyn, we have everything under control." The team rolled their eyes at me the way people do when they think you are creating trouble. I felt smaller after that. Invitations evaporated. My coworkers stopped inviting me for drinks, citing busy weekends, while Carter started getting dinner invites from the people who mattered. I tried to fight with evidence and calm words and ended up looking petty. The real pain cut deeper when a client emailed to congratulate Carter on a presentation I had delivered. I had the recordings on my flash drive proving it was my voice, my slides, my research. I played the file for the manager in the fluorescent-lit meeting room and watched his face contract between sympathy and inconvenience. "We are not going to accuse someone without more," he said, like a slow verdict. I left the office shaking and drove to the harbor, parked under sodium lights, and sat until the sky went black and the water was only a darker blur. That night I smashed a plate in my kitchen and felt better for a moment, the ceramic shattering into small, clean pieces. The relief did not last. In the quiet after the plates, I began to map my options. Revenge, I decided, would be precise rather than vicious, administrative and undeniable, public enough to take the air out of Carter's self-satisfied sails. I thought about how he loved being the center of attention, the man who could turn a handshake into credit. I practiced what I would say if I had to call someone out, measured sentences that pointed to dates, files, witnesses. I rehearsed my lines until they felt like muscle memory, but I knew rehearsals often fall apart when real people are involved. The longer I waited, the tighter the knot in my stomach became. Then a small opportunity arrived in the shape of the office holiday party, where awards would be given for the year's biggest contributors. Carter lived for those moments. He would be on stage, smiling into camera phone lights, the center of attention. I could not promise success, only that I would not let him leave the room smelling like someone else's success again. I refined the plan in my head like a machinist smoothing gears. Timing, access, the one public moment that could not be swept aside. It felt dangerous and oddly righteous, and for the first time in months I slept with a plan instead of a complaint. The week of the party, everything felt electric and dangerous. I refined my plan in careful steps that made it look like accidents and timing rather than a single woman's revenge. First, I found a way into the event schedule. I volunteered to help set up the projector slides and the award certificates. That gave me access to the envelope with the names and the evening slides. I did not touch the envelope when anyone could see me. Instead, I slipped it into my bag when I stepped away to fold napkins. I spent an hour alone in the coach room rearranging the stack of certificates so the name tags for each award would be slightly shifted. I had done things like this before in smaller measures, a corrected header here, an amended credit line there, but this felt bigger, like moving a chess piece that would topple the rest of the board. Then I swapped 2 slides on the projector deck, a tiny digital nudge that would play at the exact moment the host called the winners. I rehearsed the click in my head until the sound had the weight of inevitability. Next, I made sure the microphone was set to pick up the raw room sound rather than the speaker mix, because I wanted the moment to be messy, live, undeniable. I thought about how people remember what they hear with their eyes and what they see with their ears, a bodily thing, not just a memory. I told myself this was about justice and not humiliation. But wires can cross. I still felt a nervous heat in my hands when I taped the last envelope shut and put everything back as if I had not moved a thing. I walked back to the main room with napkins folded into neat squares and my pulse a drumbeat behind my ribs. The party began, people dressed up in their best sweaters and awkward ties, the room smelling of cheap wine and cinnamon donuts. Carter arrived with his usual loud laugh and the way he preened in the corner like a man born with applause pre-installed. He took the stage for a small award and basked in the light. My heart thumped so loud I thought he might hear it. When the host called for the rising client champion, he read the name printed on the certificate that I had slightly rearranged. The name called was his, and he rose with that smug, satisfied look that had been carved into his face. I could have called it done then, let silence do the work, but the projector click I had engineered slid up behind him like a trapdoor. The slide that filled the screen was not the flattering montage I had replaced. It was the raw audio waveform and the recording of my presentation, the one that proved I had written and delivered the work he claimed. The audio played into the open microphone and there was no escaping it. For a breath, the room held its own sound. Carter smiled at first, confident as a man who thinks any allegation will be quickly dismissed. Then the waveform on the big screen began to scroll and my voice came out, not reverberant and polished but clear and direct, the same phrases he had been repeating to anyone who would listen. I watched his color drain from his face and the laughter in the room changed pitch, from pleasant to nervous. He tried to laugh it off and step forward to take the award, but the host looked at him and read the wrong name from the certificate I had switched. The room turned. People pulled out phones and some started to play the recording they had heard with their own ears, because people wanted proof as much as they wanted drama. Carter stammered and tried to reach for the certificate, but one of the team leads held it up like a shield, and the man who had once signed my name sideways looked suddenly small and very alone. For a moment it felt like everything might tip back. He began to talk fast, to produce excuses like balled-up tissues that did not hold air. I felt the triumph in my chest like heat and then a quick cold patch of guilt. But I had planned this to correct a pattern, not to destroy a person. I let him have the room for a second, and then I stepped up with my flash drive and my calmest voice and asked if I might say a few words. The ritual of asking felt like reclaiming something, not permission but space. I told the truth in a plain voice about the presentation, about the edits, about the late nights. I let the audio do the rest. The room listened as I walked through the timeline, holding people's eyes so they would not return to Carter for permission to feel embarrassed. I watched faces, some surprised, some annoyed, some finally understanding shift like the tide. When I finished, there was a hush that felt like breathing in after being underwater for too long. Carter left the stage before the host could finish the award. He walked out of the room like a man who could not find the door he had always been proud to own. After the party, the office became a different place. Some people avoided me because they thought I had been cruel, and some came up and said, quietly, that they had been sorry they did not say something sooner. Carter stopped speaking to me and began to show up late to meetings. The manager called me in and apologized, and he promised an independent review and a reassignment of the credited work. I did not want fury, I wanted fairness, and in the weeks that followed, the review cleared my name and moved Carter onto a different team with fewer client-facing responsibilities. My hours were changed back and my projects were recognized. But the real shift was quieter. I noticed smiles that were careful at first and then relieved. People asked me to lead a project and meant it when they said my name. There were unexpected costs. A few coworkers whispered that I had humiliated Carter, that I had savored his moment of failure. I told myself I had only given people a chance to see what I had been saying in numbers and timestamps. I had not imagined the loneliness that would follow. In the weeks after the party, a neighbor I had not known well, a woman who walked her dog every morning past my building, started to wave and bring me coffee from the bakery. Small kindnesses like that reminded me I could live in the world without needing permission from people who polished themselves on other people's backs. The manager moved my promotion back into consideration, and this time the conversation was different. It was about the work, about the clients, and about the team. I felt steadier in my seat at the table than I had in years. The victory, when it arrived, was not a confetti cannon but a settling of dust. My name was on a client email chain with praise attached. My slides were cited in a handoff packet. An associate thanked me in a meeting for taking the late shift so she could get home to her kids. These were small restorations, but they accumulated into a weight that anchored me. I started to take the long route home sometimes, walking past the harbor lights and letting the cold air scrape the edges of whatever had been raw inside me. I practiced being ordinary in public again, smiling without armor, answering the barista when she asked about my weekend, and each practiced ordinary act became less like pretending and more like rebuilding. Still, the aftertaste of what I had done lingered. At lunch, a pair of colleagues dissected the party like sports fans, assigning credit and blame with the bored cruelty of people who need to feel superior. I caught a coworker's eye across the cafeteria, and she looked away as if avoiding a fissure. I did not argue with them when they said I had gone too far. Some nights I would replay the sound of the room and feel a prick of shame. Had I exposed him to cruelty that would follow him forever? I thought about Carter alone in his apartment, the same apartment where he had once leaned in to ask me for help with a spreadsheet, and then filed my work under his name. I tried to imagine a version of justice that did not require spectacle, but the truth was that spectacle had been the only tool I had left that would reach everyone at once. At home, my apartment felt both quieter and larger. I found myself buying a plant at the corner shop, a small, stubborn succulent, and naming it out loud in the absurd, private way people do to interrupt a day. Caring for it was a tiny discipline that steadied me, a measured pour of water, a place on the sill where the winter light hit in the afternoon. The plant did not care about my plans or my grudges. It wanted sun and occasional attention. It taught me, in a humbling way, how small consistencies could restore something fractured. Then there were the odd, practical consequences. I lost an easy camaraderie with people who had once been allies of convenience. Invitations stopped coming, the group drinks, the weekend hikes. An ill-placed comment in the stairwell became a rumor that I had staged the whole thing to get attention. I could have spent my energy correcting every whisper, but I chose instead to let my daily work be the correction. Meetings that used to undercut me now deferred to my agenda. A junior analyst I was mentoring began to ask for my input on her deck, and when she introduced me to a client, she used my full name with a clarity that felt like an offering. And yet loneliness slid into the corners I had not anticipated. People had watched me pull a curtain aside and reveal something true, and for some that truth came with discomfort they projected back at me. I gave up the easy warmth of being liked by everyone for the steadier warmth of being respected by some. On certain evenings, after the office quieted and the computers blinked into sleep, I would stand at my window and watch the harbor lights outline the ships, thinking about lines and boundaries, which ones I had crossed and which ones had protected me. The next morning, I would tie my scarf the same way, put my keys in the same pocket, and go to work with fewer illusions and more tools. In time, the balance shifted again towards something sustainable. The manager, now more cautious, checked in differently, not flurried apologies but an email asking if I wanted to lead the next client round table. I took it. When I sat at that table, it felt less like triumph and more like the writing of a ledger. My name on the invite was not a loud bell but a quiet acknowledgement that the work mattered, and that I had not been invisible. The cost of what I had done remained: a few strained smiles, a couple of doors that stayed closed, but they were a trade I could live with. I had reclaimed my seat, and with it, the permission to do the work I knew how to do best. There was one more turn I had not expected. A month after everything settled, Carter emailed a short apology. The message was tidy and neutral, the kind you write when you want to keep options open rather than close wounds. He said he regretted the confusion and hoped we could move forward. There was no admission of malice, no ownership of the small betrayals that had accumulated into the thing that broke me. I read it twice, then let the screen dim and did not reply. I could have sent back a line of hot words and felt better for a moment, but I had learned the hard way that temper makes poor evidence. Instead, I folded the message into the drawer where I kept the printed emails and the flash drive, a quiet archive of the work and the way I'd been erased. I walked to the waterfront because I needed a place that had room to think. The harbor was calm, the Navy Yard lights blinking like patient stars. Boats rocked gently, untroubled by office politics, and the air smelled of salt and diesel and something older than both: time. I sat on a bench and let the city's small noises arrange themselves into a rhythm I could follow. I thought about the difference between revenge and repair, and about why I had felt so hungry for an audience. The party had been as much for me as it was for anyone else, a stage where truth could be seen as plainly as it had been heard. But the apology reminded me that exposure doesn't fix everything. It makes the lie visible. It does not always heal the person who told it or the places that let it happen. I had wanted to be seen and to keep my work from being stolen. I had not wanted to break anything that could not be fixed. That line between correction and destruction had guided my decisions more than I realized. The victory I had imagined beforehand would have been a bright, triumphant shout. The result was quieter, steadier, like a lamp you turn on in a room and realize you can see what's been there all along. When I stood, there was a lightness in my chest. Not the puffed-up high of revenge achieved, but the steadier buoyancy of someone who has righted her footing after a wave. Back at the office, I spent my bonus on a leadership workshop I had bookmarked months ago, but never thought I could afford. It felt fitting to put the payoff toward growth instead of indulgence. The workshop was full of people who wanted to do better and didn't always know how. A mix of earnest mid-career strugglers, a few burned-out managers, and one junior analyst whose nervous hands and steady questions reminded me of my younger self. I volunteered to mentor her, at first because I liked the idea of paying forward what I had fought to reclaim. The more time I spent helping another person learn how to document a claim, present a case, and keep a clear record, the more my own anger smoothed into something useful. The office is not perfect. There are still people who will try to walk over others for a moment of shine. There are still the small cruelties, an elbow in a meeting, a joke aimed to shrink someone mid-sentence. But I learned that you sometimes make the world fairer by refusing to be small, by preparing your case, and by choosing a public moment to stand up. The cost had been higher than I guessed: friendships frayed, evenings spent replaying details until they lost shape, and the reward was quieter than I had imagined. The change stuck. I sleep better now, take projects without apologizing for my ambition, and let others take credit only when it's honestly theirs. When I catch Carter in the hall, I do not look for revenge in my chest anymore. I simply look for the work to do next, and for the small ways I can make sure the next person like me will not have to fight alone.